All right, it looks like everyone has been admitted. I want to say good morning. It is 11:31. My name is Michael Tilley. I serve as the Associate State Director for Monitoring and Compliance. We appreciate your joining this morning. We have allotted 30 minutes, so we'll jump right into the presentation. We wanted to provide an overview of some upcoming budget form revisions to give you all the rationale behind the change prior to a more comprehensive webinar on the specific processes that would be used. If you do have questions, we ask that you either type them in the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted. There's only about 7 slides in the slide deck, so if you can wait until the very end to ask those, we'll have plenty of time for questions, comments, discussion. All right, so the overview of this webinar. We're going to be able, by the end of this presentation, to identify relevant WIOA Title II statute sections as well as regulations that necessitate a change in budget form revisions. We'll be able to understand administrative cost categories as required in statute and regulations. We'll understand when administrative cost negotiations are appropriate. We'll be able to recognize the revised budget process for 26-27. Again, there's going to be an upcoming webinar on August 18th that will go into detail about those processes. But by the end of this presentation, you'll at least be able to recognize what those upcoming changes will be. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. All right, I want to ground this conversation in both statutory requirements as well as regulatory requirements. But first in statute, the law that was written by Congress, signed into law by the President. There's a specific section in Title II of WIOA. It's Section 233. And I'm going to read it verbatim just so you know where we're pulling these changes from. Subject to subsection B, the amount that is made available under this Title II specifically to an eligible provider, those being the community colleges and community-based organizations in North Carolina. It shall not be less than 95% to be expended for carrying out adult education and literacy activities. And when it says adult ed and literacy activities, it talks about instruction in that, not those administrative costs. That second item under A, the remaining amount not to exceed 5% shall be used for planning, administration, including carrying out the requirements of Section 116. And Section 116, if you're not familiar with that, it's all about performance accountability. So those NRS assessments, pre-post tests, professional development, and the activities described in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Section 232. To save everyone talking about 232, I'll in just a bit talk about the regulations that detail those 5 administrative activities. There's also a special rule in Section 233 of WIOA, and it states, in cases where the cost limits described in subsection A are too restrictive to allow for the activities described in subsection A2, the eligible provider, the community colleges, CBOs in North Carolina, shall negotiate with the eligible agency, in this case, the North Carolina Community College System as that pass-through entity, in order to determine an adequate level of funds to be used for non-instructional purposes. In layman's terms, the statute says you need to use 95% of your allocated amount for instruction and the remaining 5% for administrative cost activities. Those activities they describe in those 5 activities in statute, as well as regulations, which I'll show in just a second. And that special rule in layman's terms, if you need more than 5% to carry out those administrative activities, then you have to negotiate with the pass-through entity, the North Carolina Community College System Office, to determine an adequate level of fund to be used for that non-instructional purposes. I'm going to jump over to regulation. Regulation is written when statute is either A, unclear as written, or B, could be written in a more user-friendly language. It holds the same weight and umph as statute does, so it's still required to be followed. It's not guidance, it's essentially has the same weight as law. In this, there are 2 relevant sections of Title 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and you'll hear me reference just 34 CFR when talking about Title 34 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and it's specifically parts 463.25 to 26. 463.25 talks about that special rule that not more than 5% of that local grant to the eligible provider can be expended to administer the grant or contract under Title II. In cases where 5% is too restrictive to allow for administrative activities, the eligible agency, the North Carolina Community College System Office in this example, may increase the amount that can be spent on local administration. In such cases, the eligible provider must negotiate with the eligible agency to determine an adequate level of funds to be used for non-instructional purposes. That's essentially restating exactly what was in Section 233 of WIOA, but in more user-friendly language. And then where those 5 activities that are considered local administrative costs are going to include planning, administration, including carrying out those performance accountability requirements in Section 116 of WIOA, professional development, providing adult ed and literacy services in alignment with local workforce plans, including promoting co-enrollment in programs and activities under Title I as appropriate, and then carrying out those one-stop partner responsibilities, including the infrastructure costs of the one-stop delivery system. So planning, administration, professional development, alignment of services, and one-stop partner responsibilities all fall within the administrative category. In previous budget forms, there were some non-instructional activities, specifically the salaries of non-instructional staff that could include the program director, coordinators, anyone that doesn't have a direct instruction component. Those were counted as instructional, and no one really went over that 5% administrative cost limit. This year, we're going to more closely align with the requirements in statute and regulations, and those would be coded as administrative costs. And it is likely that you will go above that 5%, not necessarily, but it could be so. And we wanted to share the rationale for that required negotiation moving forward. This is a very rough draft of the 26-27 budget form template. Again, we're not going into details on how to fill this out. This is a draft form, and in that August 18th webinar, there's going to be 90 minutes where Carla and Mike will very thoroughly go through these forms, but I just wanted to show you at a glance what would be changing. They've been broken up into instructional related budgets for those salaries of your instructors and any instructional salaries, and then administrative costs that include both direct administrative as well as indirect administrative costs. That would include the salaries for your directors who aren't instructing, or a portion of the salary if that director does have an instructor role. It would include those NRS assessment staff, your coordinators, anyone who isn't providing direct instruction. It would also include professional development, as well as non-instructional staff travel. So that's travel to and from the system office conference would fall under that administrative cost section, whereas instructional staff travel could include going between satellite campuses for instructors. Again, we're going to be talking more into detail about what needs to go in each line item in that August 18th webinar. If you do have an administrative cost that's over 5% of your allocated amount, you're going to need to submit a justification for why you need to spend more than 5%. That will go in this text box, and it will be part of the review process for your budget submission. I will say it is in negotiation just because you're requesting that amount. If it isn't reasonable, necessary, allocable as required in uniform guidance, that higher percentage may not be automatically guaranteed. There's going to be a thorough review both at the system office, and then we may reach back out to you if it is an extremely high amount, though we're not setting a limit at this point as to what that amount can be. It just needs to fall within the uniform guidance requirements as being reasonable, necessary, allocable, allowable. As a reminder, as it relates to the budget, Dr. Rob Van Dyke sent out a recent temporary pause of professional association-related PD activities. That pause is still temporarily in place. So you can't use your federal AFLA funds for registration for conferences, trainings, or events hosted by professional associations, membership dues to those professional associations, travel, lodging, or other costs associated with that professional association sponsored PD event. And it applies whether those activities are in person or virtual and in state or out of state. The restriction doesn't apply to the upcoming North Carolina Community College System Conference or CCR's convocation. If you do need to spend monies on those professional association activities, within the email, and I've also just posted it right here on the slide, reach out to your finance office to determine if you have non-federal, non-basic skills state funds that could be utilized for those professional association related PD activities. Just wanted to highlight that since that's still in place. All right, so next steps of what you need to do. Please attend that budget process webinar on August 18th at 10 a.m. It's scheduled for 90 minutes, so there's going to be a plethora of time to talk about what needs to go in each line item, how to submit the budget form for processing and approval. If you have questions about the rationale behind the upcoming changes, feel free to reach out to myself at mtilley@ncommunitycolleges.edu. We wanted to provide you all an opportunity to hear of these upcoming changes. So in that August 18th webinar, you're not blindsided of the required changes, but we wanted to give you some time also today if there are any questions about the rationale behind these upcoming changes, that we could have those discussions. This concludes the prepared slide deck. We've got about 18 minutes if you have any questions or need clarification on the upcoming changes to that budget form for program year 26-27.
Dr. Tilley, we have some questions in the chat.
Okay.
Would you like me to read those?
Sure.
All right. From Amy, does the 5% apply to overall allocations, the federal and state, or just federal only?
Just the federal. Arbany, please correct me if I've got that mistaken, because it's talking about the grant from the federal amount, and that's where Section 233 comes into play. If that does change, Amy will provide clarification in that August 18th webinar.
Okay, and then that was the same question that Nicole had. And the next question is, what would a reasonable justification be since the programs have traditionally budgeted over 5%? Is there a standard form that will be used?
Thanks for asking that, Jen. There's not the standard form that's going to be used is the budget form, and I would include the necessity of having such a high administrative cost, the purpose and value that those non-instructional related staff members bring to the program, and how you would be unable to carry out your programming if you weren't allocated that additional administrative costs.
Okay, and then are instructional coordinators still classified as instructional salaries?
Amy, are those instructional coordinators providing instruction? Are they pulling together lesson plans? Or could you tell a little bit more about what the role of that instructional coordinator would be? And feel free to unmute yourself.
So I think that programs tend to have different types of coordinators. There are coordinators with an instructional focus, so they are the ones that are supporting our instructional team, and they frequently have instructional responsibilities, but they have responsibilities to related to curriculum, related to content standards, so an instructional coordinator, their focus is on instructional activities, but they are not only in the classroom. They may also be in the classroom. And then there are more programmatic coordinators or transition coordinators who would not really have that instruction focus in their role and responsibilities.
I appreciate the clarification in that. And Amy, I think there could be a justification, an argument made that instructional coordinator specifically could lean towards the instructional category, but it depends whether they have activities that are considered local admin cost of planning and administration. So it sounds like in the example that you provided, some of that role may be planning administration, and some of that may be more directly instructional centered, such as ensuring lesson plans are implemented with fidelity. Um, I think it would depend, and in that August 18th webinar, I think we can have a little bit more criteria of what each role would fall under specifically for that instructional coordinator. But that again would be beneficial to include in the justification. So if there is an instructional coordinator that you did code as administrative, but you say these are their roles and responsibilities, we could say actually they would fall into instructional rather than administrative.
And just to clarify, I think previously you said that we're discussing the federal award, not necessarily the state match funds, but there was going to be clarification on that. And on the budget form, are we going to continue to separate the federal allocation and the state allocation when we're in our columns, or?
My understanding is that they're going to be compiled together. Carla, if I'm misspeaking on that, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is the screenshot of the most recent draft, and they're compiled into one on that form.
Yes, that's correct.
Nicole, yes, we can send out these slides. My understanding is that this meeting is being recorded. We can attach this to the posting when it's made available publicly.
If a part of a coordinator's job is to teach, would that count towards instruction or non-instruction?
Thanks, Jen, for that question. And I would say that would be whichever part is they're teaching, that would be coded as an instructional activity. And then the part where they're not teaching, depending on the specific roles and responsibilities of that coordinator, may fall under instructional salaries, may fall under non-instructional category based on planning and administration as written in regulation. So the more details that you can provide, Jen, in that justification of the specific roles and responsibilities, the more beneficial it's going to be for us when we're reviewing it.
And then the next question, have these new restrictions been communicated to the business and finance offices of the individual colleges?
Patrick, not to my understanding.
So they have these new restrictions and updates. So the restrictions on travel to professional association sponsored events has been communicated to your CFOs. The new budget form has not been communicated to the CFOs, but we're going to take a two-pronged approach. We are going to send the information to the CFOs to attend our August 18th meeting, and I am also going to put this information regarding the budget webinar in the Chief Academic Officer's update document so that multiple stakeholders on staff will have access to this information.
Perfect. And then Claudia had the question, would the state allocation have the same restrictions?
Not necessarily, Claudia. This is specifically in regulation. It talks about that federal award that's being given. However, with that being said, there may be the same requirements for state match as there is for the federal grant. So there may still be that cap of the 5%. And I know that contradicts a little bit what I told Amy earlier. I'm just thinking through the requirements of that state match award. So I do think, now that I'm thinking it through out loud, that it does apply both to state and federal. And Arbany and Carla, if I'm misspeaking on either of those parts, please correct me.
No, you're correct. Obviously, you all know that we have to provide a percentage of a state match for maintenance of effort. So the state matching dollars will have the same restrictions. However, just like you're able to negotiate this whole negotiation process with the federal dollars, it will apply to your state matching dollars as well. I just checked with Mike Till. We have so many Michaels and Matthews on our team. I just checked with Mike Tilsley and Carla, and I think that's going to be the process that they use with Dr. Tilley.
Thank you, Arpany. And Amy, I hope that provides some clarification to my previous answer on your first question.
Sorry, I put myself on mute. The next question is from Callie. Does this mean that the director or dean salary cannot be paid out of the grant funds? And if so, have the same questions as Jennifer Mock. What if the director or the dean is an instructor of the class?
So it doesn't necessarily mean that, no. You're currently allowed to pull 5% to spend on administrative costs, which can cover that director and dean salary if they don't have an instructional component. You're able to negotiate a higher amount, again, if it's necessary for the program to be administered. If that director or dean does have an instructor role as well, that would be split between non-instructional and instructional. So the instructional portion should be easily paid out of by the grant, but depending on what percentage you all are proposing for your administrative costs, it may be necessary and it may not be necessary or reasonable, more likely. If it's, for example, an 80% administrative cost that you're proposing, that's probably not reasonable for the award to be spent solely on administrative costs. But again, it depends on that justification that's provided.
All right. Do you anticipate there being other allocations to provide to carry out the required 13 considerations? There's a lot of emphasis on aligning to the workforce plan, professional development, et cetera.
I'm going to turn that over to Arpany Cooper.
Oh, thank you, Michael. So as of right now, we don't anticipate any additional allocations. However, we do anticipate that there will be probably a small amount of reallocation dollars like you received last year, and we'll take that to the board probably in September. We're looking at the final numbers now, so you'll have your general budgets 225, 231, 243, and the possibility of reallocation dollars as well. But as of right now, we do not foresee any additional dollars, any additional set aside dollars being allocated for adult education.
All right. And I think the rest of the conversations about the budget webinar, which Dan will be getting out later today. And I think the next question comes from Steve Gunter. So data management responsibilities would fall into the administrative costs as well, correct?
Yes, that would. So you're correct in that. And again, that's called out very explicitly in regulation, administration, including carrying out performance accountability requirements. And that would fall under that admin cost. And I know this is a change in previous practices, and that's why we wanted to share the news sooner rather than later, especially during that budget form process webinar, because it is a change in practice. We want to more closely align and be compliant with federal statute and regulations.
All right, so we'll read this one from Sherry. So it is the 5%, the total of the state and federal together, or is it the 5% of the state and then 5% of the federal?
Ooh,
Does that
Sherry,
make
that's a lot of math for an early morning. I think that's the same. The 5% of everything would be 5% of state and federal, or if it's combined. But
Yes,
don't
that's
trust my
correct.
math on a Thursday at 11:55.
Yes, that's correct, Dr. Tilley. It is the 5%, and Carla's nodding her head. Yes, it's the 5% of your combination of state and federal. So if you get 50,000 in federal and 50,000 in state, then it would just be the 5% overall of both of those amounts combined. It wouldn't be 5% on one and then 5% on the other for a total of 10%. It's just 5% flat.
All right. And so are the conversations about revising the state match policy so that more of the state funds could be unrestricted from federal regulation?
Um, we have not had a chance to have those conversations as of yet, because I don't know if you all are aware of this, but anytime that we make any substantial changes to funding policies and procedures, it has to go back to the General Assembly. So the rules and regulations just don't sit at the system office. We have to have statutory approval through the General Assembly. And I do hear you and understand exactly what you're saying because the federal programs piece makes it very restrictive. Now, one thing that we are looking into is reducing the maintenance of effort gradually because right now we are 100% in. And so we want to reduce those percentages so that we can free up some of those dollars. But again, all changes to methods of allocation for funding have to be approved by the General Assembly. But we hear you and we are taking all of that into consideration. We just have to have everything, all of our information and research done before we ask our executive director of external relations to take it to the General Assembly because we want to make sure when we go there that they have all the information that they need to meet your needs.
Right. And so our data specialist salary will come from this fund, is what Alicia's
Alicia,
asking.
if they don't have any instruction related activities in their job description, if they're just doing NRS assessments, data entry, that would be an administrative activity based on regulation. It would fall under that B administration, including carrying out performance accountability requirements.
So just to follow up on that. So like our data specialist, Michelle, many of you know Michelle, she is a data specialist, but she also coordinates and teaches. So the percentage of her that's data specialist, say 25% or 50% of her total duties can would be administrative. And the instructional would be instructional, but that includes state and federal, like the state. So we couldn't use state or federal funds to pay for the data specialist piece.
Yes. Yes, you can use the state and federal funds to pay for it.
We would just have to get it approved.
No. No, if she's doing anyone doing work towards the federal grant, whether it be a data specialist, a data coordinator, everyone has different names, LEIS specialist, yes, you can pay for that out of your federal and state dollars. You would just put the administrative part of her work would just be coded for the administrative part of the budget.
Okay.
And then the teaching part would go up to, I can't see it so small. I think it's I. It would go up to line I for the instructional part. But yes, you may absolutely pay for your data and performance specialists, LAIS specialists, data coordinators. The only folks that you cannot pay for out of this money are the HSC people. But
we would still have to get anything above the 5% approved.
You would still have to, and we use the word approve, but we really want to use the term negotiate.
Okay.
Because you're going to be negotiating that percentage with our office, right? Because we want to make sure that you have what you need to run your program.
So does this affect the FTE dollars? Are those incorporated or separated?
Michael, do you want to take that question?
The FTE dollars are what's used as state match, so it would include those as well.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, can I ask a follow-up on that?
Please do, Eric.
So it includes the state match. If your FTE dollars exceed what the state match would be, how does that affect it? In other words, if your FTE dollars are greater than what the allocation would be in the state, I don't know how to articulate that exactly. So I know it's going to be specific to certain larger institutions, but does that change the calculation?
No,
No.
the calculation doesn't change based upon the size of the institution. The 5% is the 5%. So if you get 100 in federal, and remember everyone, we're 65-35. So we're
Right.
65% state and 35% federal. And so for everyone on this call, the state match is always going to be larger than the federal amount. So larger institutions, medium size, small size, the 5% is the 5%. It doesn't change. And remember, you're negotiating above the 5%. So if you want to go up to, I don't want to say a number that might get Dr. Tilley mad. So I'll just say, if you want to go up to 20%, you can do that in the negotiation process. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, Arbany.
All right, and so I'm gonna read the comment from Amy. I think the challenge for most of us will be that the 5% is going to be very low amount that would not allow us to carry out the required activities.
And again, Amy and Dr. Tilley, you stopped me, and I've got to hop over to 12 o'clock. I'm already 2 minutes late. We're not capping it at 5%. You're able to negotiate above the 5%. So per the law, you can negotiate, let's just say, I'll throw out a number, you can negotiate up to 45% of administrative costs. Now, we're going to look at that very closely and say, I don't know exactly why you want to take 45% of your overall dollars for administrative costs, but let's just say you have a lot of coordinators and supervisors and data specialists and all the things. So again, the 5% is not the cap. The 5% is the starting percentage, and you can negotiate up from there.
All right. Do we want to keep going with questions for a little bit longer?
We'll
Or?
just stay on for a couple more minutes.
Okay. And so from Karen, will this include the cost of the tape testing?
So tape testing should fall under educational, either materials or supplies. I forget which one, but that would be included in the instructional category.
Brandy and Michael, I need you to look at the private message I sent you to see if we should announce that.
It's fine with me.
So I'm going to announce it. We don't currently have a PD archives because we sunset NC Title II and we haven't set it up yet with our new plan, which should happen soon, but it hasn't happened yet. So once I get this video edited and uploaded to YouTube, I will mail the link out to all directors. Only the directors. It doesn't matter if you're in this meeting. I'm not going to try and go through and pick out everybody extra. So if the directors want to share it, they can send it to anybody they want.
All right. And Amanda has a question. What's the timeline for negotiation, and when would we know the results?
That's a great question, Amanda. We have not had this process in place. I would hope that we could get it negotiated in a couple weeks, but I don't want to be tied to that timeline. Depending on the number of providers that are requesting a negotiation, and depending on how complex those requests are, it may take longer and it may take shorter if it's fewer that are requesting and less complex scenarios. But a couple weeks would be my hope.
And would transportation to students to attend class or childcare considered instruction support or admin?
I would want to know a little bit more about that. That sounds like transportation and childcare assistance. That may be a different piece in and of itself.
All right, team, y'all help me make sure I didn't skip any questions. And if I did just skip your question, you can come off mic.
I'm seeing a recurring one. What's a reasonable percentage that will be negotiated? I think Arbany threw out 20% as being semi-reasonable. I would agree with that. I would think that depending on the situation, 80% probably wouldn't be reasonable, but depending on the justification that was added, the negotiation information that was provided, we would still consider and look at that and negotiate that. But we don't have a hard, anything above this percentage won't be allowed, anything below will be allowed. It's depending on what is included in that justification narrative. I'm seeing that same question about transportation. I don't feel comfortable providing an exact answer right now on that, but I would like to include that in the August 18th webinar. Carla, if you have some time for adding that transportation and childcare consideration. Harpany, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this last one. I'm also being cognizant of time. It's 12:06. Are you expecting the state budget to be released at the August state board meeting?
Yes, we are expecting the state FTE allocation information to go to the board in August. Again, the governor has signed it, so we can move pretty quickly on getting it to the state board. I just had a meeting yesterday on allocation amounts, so we are very hopeful that we will be able to have some really good news for you the third week in August. We're trying to move lightning fast.
Thanks, Harpany. I'm being cognizant of time. I know that there's a question about the webinar. Dan just posted that in the chat. If you do have any questions again about the rationale for the change, my email is listed up on the screen. I'm also going to post in the chat, and I may regret this later, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to put in my phone number if you want to reach out. This is my work phone. I'm happy to have a conversation about this, and I hope I don't regret it, and I probably won't, but I wanted you all to have that opportunity if you want to have further detailed conversations about this. Arbany, are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to provide on this?
No, I just want to say thank you all so much for everything that you do. As we've combined the federal programs team, we are making changes all around. I hope you all feel that they're good changes. We're listening to you. We're taking everything you're saying into consideration because we want to make sure that you have all the support that you need to run your programs in an excellent way. And if something comes up as you are working on your budgets, please feel free to reach out to Carla, Michael Tilley, Brandy. They'll be glad to help you.
Thank you, Arbany. And thank you everyone for attending today. We look forward to chatting more about budgets on the 18th.